very common in the global south. There is this kind of Stockholm Syndrome in a societal level where we kind of fall in love with our captors. We worship their standards, we crave their validation, and measure our own worth by their mirrors, their perspective, their standards, even as it erases our own culture. We have learned to kind of rationalize and even defend systems that harm us. What do you think makes this psychological capture so effective? And how do you think we can become more aware of these ways we are being conditioned to protect the systems that harm us?
Well, this is a tough one because we're born into concentration camps and we're made to believe that, if we behave well, then we're going to be rewarded and we're going to receive benefits. We're going to receive comfort and we're going to be applauded or celebrated by the guards of this concentration camp. So when your whole world is this system, it takes a lot for you to start to question, like, but why are things like this? Especially when your parents, the people who you're supposed to trust to sort of educate and protect you, are the ones who are kind of, having learned how to comply and succeed in this concentration camp, they are the ones who first teach you how to do that as well, whether or not you can see, through this system. And there are definitely people who can see that from a very young age. This is the reason why we have, the even from toddlers, right? They say terrible twos. You are kind of like rebelling against a lot of things, or when you reach 4 years old, you're asking why a lot, and then you get a bunch of answers that don't seem to make sense to you, and it seems just kind of like wrong, or this doesn't seem to explain anything. Like I'm not really getting satisfactory responses. And there's a lot of also research in uh human biology in terms of especially this nurture versus nature dynamic of like how are certain personalities made or how do certain ideologies form in the brain, etc. What age, how like education helps or not helps, and how does like contact with the mother or in different cultures like with other older women who are taking care of you, etc. Like how do these things influence like your upbringing and how you view the world as an adult, etc. So there's a lot of these studies that are genetic and epigenetic, which I think are really important as well when it comes to, you know, being able essentially to start uh having your own independent thoughts versus adopting and, an indoctrinated culture and belief system that would keep you very much under control of the power structure. There was one very interesting um, bit of information regarding epigenetics around how indigenous people raise children, related also to the mother's fertility cycles and etc., which is very abnormal for us to do that in this way that we do, which is essentially that you give birth and then more or less like, your child is weaned as soon as possible if you're breastfeeding, for example. And then you are, as a mother, sort of like expected to go back to normal life, which is like work, basically. The emancipation of women means that you're chained to the office desk or whatever, whatever your wage work is. And in indigenous communities that were studied in this way, they found that children were actually breastfed, depending on the culture, sometimes by one woman only, like the mother, or sometimes by many women who are all having children of similar ages at the same time. but children are usually breastfed until they're 4 or 5 years old. And so there's a lot of skin to skin contact with the mother throughout all of that time because of breastfeeding. And they are like have a transition period into solid foods over like a number of years. So if we look upon this as sort of the natural growth cycle of a child, then you can see something about learning and like being forced to be in a particular space when compared to like how we are expected to do mothering as like, women in modern Western civilization. And then there's this other very interesting bit of this anthropological research, which was the same study that they tracked the same children and they found that there was no teenage rebellion years because children were always allowed to make their own mistakes ever since the beginning. They were allowed like to be creative, to be independent, to go off and do, whatever with anyone. And their education is all within the community based on like festivals or certain rituals that would be done throughout certain times of the year, etc. And so because they had outlets, because they had interactions with children of many different ages, etc., and because of indigenous laws, essentially, like how community is governed, there is a very healthy transition into adulthood. There is no teenage rebellion at all. And there is a very sort of supported movement into having their own children and generating, new people, new ideas, new creative spirits, literally, into that community. And so this is what is the cycle of life and the way that education is very embedded, right, into the practices of motherhood and of being a child. So when we look at, how different that is to the concentration camps that we are growing up in modern Western civilization, the things that were denied, the level of unhealthiness basically in our entire upbringing, how are we supposed to start to even question things? How are we supposed to understand that there are alternatives to living this way and that we can actually be happy and we can actually all be worthy citizens of our own communities and have like a purpose, a place, an identity, a culture, a belief system that isn't trying to kill us or exploit us or use us or abuse us in other ways. So, like, how are we supposed to know that? You know?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think there are all these mechanisms of enforcement and incentivization to keep us invested in the system, especially, and it's so hard to see, as you said, when all the people around you are validating the system. So this first step of beginning to see how this dynamic is playing out is the most difficult one, because in a Stockholm syndrome, it's not like the person who is suffering that does see that love as genuine, not as something that is manufactured, right? As a protective mechanism. So it's
Yeah.
like to start questioning that already is such a huge step. And even how, you know, the Stockholm syndrome operates, where the dominant party is not always bad and cruel and hurts you. There's also these moments of alternating between cruelty and small gestures of care and mercy that confuses the nervous system. And
We have a very cultural experience in Asian households, especially in Chinese households, where your parent would discipline you, usually physical discipline. So in my case, I received canings. So these are like thin strips of bamboo that are whipped in like through the air to like hit children. Usually this bamboo strip is like about a meter long. And the thinner ones are more painful because they're more whippy. The stiffer ones are not that painful. The whippy ones draw blood most of the time, depending on how angry your parent is,
Mhm.
how much physical force that they're using. So I used to get whipped a lot. You're kind of like grounded in your room after this physical abuse, and then your parent would come in with like wound cream or something, like antiseptic or
Mm.
whatever, and then they'll be like, "Oh, I'm doing this for your own good. Here, let me help you, blah, blah, blah." It's like insane. It's bipolar. It's completely
Mhm.
bipolar. And it makes me completely distrust anything that they're saying and doing, etc. Because you're telling me it's for my own good, but I'm the only kid walking around school with like all these scars and fresh wounds and etc. I mean, these types of gaslighting are like accepted. These are cultural embedded things that everybody goes through in those generations. Like I would say like that has definitely changed. I have even met a few Asians who are my parents' generations who have never hit their kids. And I was really shocked when I met some of them because I was like, wait, so you guys knew? Like it wasn't because this is also the gaslighting that, my parents would tell me that was like, oh, how are we supposed to know? Like everyone does this. This is how you discipline your kids. And it's like, no, apparently at that time, there was a lot of discourse in society about like how this is kind of wrong or bad or cruel and etc. So it was a choice, and it's always a choice. So I think the Stockholm Syndrome thing is, I mean, firstly, it's entirely based on gaslighting. Secondly, it's built upon this belief that the kidnappers really do care for you. They really do. But in order to show their care for you, they have to behave in these ways. So there's a self-gaslighting on the side of the captors, and then there's the gaslighting on the side of the captives as well of like not only is this like makes no sense for both sides, but it just is the way that things have to be.
Absolutely. And when you bring in the intergenerational dynamic of that happening, these acts, small acts of reward, and it's kind of like over time, the victim starts adopting the oppressor's values, language, worldview as it's kind of like if I
Yeah.
become like them, then I will be safe. It's
Not
so
only that, it becomes nostalgic. So, like I said, it's cultural that everybody experienced this kind of, discipline, and then they experience their parent coming in to give like the cream or to help you with your wounds or whatever that they inflicted. Like people feel nostalgic about that. That moment when your parent comes in and hugs you and says like, "Oh," they never ever apologize, but they'll say like, "Oh, you've been so bad and I hope you've learned your lesson and
mm,
everything is, your fault, obviously." And then people feel nostalgic about that because that's the moment of connection. That's the
yeah.
moment that, is has been neglected for the whole time. And instead you have to receive the physical abuse in order to receive that moment of connection. So there's this a nostalgia that comes with that I think is not often talked about in Stockholm Syndrome, especially when it's a cultural thing like that, where a lot of people experience it and a lot of people see this as like a good moment in their relationship with their parent, for example. So, I mean, these are children who are held captive by their abusers, and the entire society says that this is fine.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so sad. And as you said, there are other options much more healthy available to us, but the system holds this such tight grip that beginning to see that and beginning to see that what you are living is abnormal is it's like so hard, as you were saying, when these things are out there. Like as you said, there were some conversations happening at the time, but then how do you choose to look at it or not?
Yeah, I mean, okay, we didn't have internet, social media. We had books, we had libraries.
Exactly.
TV.
Yeah, there are other options available.
Right, like there are other ways to learn about like, alternatives. And yeah, this is this is what they chose.